The Center for Islamic Information and Education presents The Battle of Badr, told by Brother Kamal al-Makki.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalamu ala Rasulillahi al-Ameen. Amma ba'd. Today we're going to begin talking about the Battle of Badr, inshaAllah. And it is also known as Yawmul Furqan, the day of distinction. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala called it the day of distinction, because it is during that day that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala clearly distinguished between the forces of truth and the forces of evil. And we find that there were 4 different stages before the Muslims started to engage the non-Muslims in battle. The first stage was that of patience, and no fighting was allowed. And this was during the time when the Muslims were in Mecca. And in the second stage, that's when they were given permission to fight, and this was after the Hijrah. They were given the permission to fight. And that's why you see a lot of expeditions and things start to happen before Badr during this time. And the third was the Muslims were commanded to fight back. They were commanded here. So from permission to a command. So now they're commanded to fight back those who fight them. Then in the 4th stage, they're commanded to fight the mushrikeen in general. And there could be a lot of reasons behind why the fighting period was delayed until this time, until the time of Medina. And part of that, it could be that the Muslims themselves were in a stage of development. And as they say, they were not ripe yet. So it was not time for them to engage in battle. Meaning number-wise and also individually. Perhaps they were not prepared for something as difficult as battle. And it also could be that the time was not right, meaning on a worldly scale. And this is a nice analysis by one of the scholars, that had the Muslims tried to fight while they were in Mecca, the Quraysh would have made it an internal affair and quickly exterminate them. An example is that of the Russians and the Chechens. The Russians now, they want us to believe that this is an internal issue, that no one should interfere in it, it's no one's business. It's just an internal issue that they're taking care of. And they're more or less given the freedom to do what they want because it's an internal affair. And in that sense, it could have been the same thing for the Muslims had they started to fight in Mecca, that it would have been treated as an internal affair and it would have been quickly exterminated in that sense. Now, a lot of us know that the Battle of Badr did not really begin as a battle. It started, even before the events of the battle itself, it started with an expedition known as Ghazwat Ushayra, or Ushayra expedition, or platoon of Ushayra. And in that event, the Prophet ﷺ had led 150, and in some narrations 200 of his companions, in an attempt to intercept the caravan of the Quraysh. Because we all know the surah, لِإِلَافِ قُرَيْشِ إِلَافِهِمْ رِحْلَةِ الشِّتَاءِ وَالصَّيْفِ. رِحْلَةِ الشِّتَاءِ وَالصَّيْفِ are the trade voyages of the Quraysh, where they would go to Yemen and to Syria to trade. So the Prophet ﷺ tried to intercept this caravan on its way out of Mecca. But when they reached the place where they were supposed to intercept them, they discovered that the caravan had left some days before. So they were not able to intercept them and they missed them. And they made use of the expedition, and the Prophet ﷺ signed some non-aggression pacts with some of the tribes in those areas. So of course then, they tried to get him on the way going. If you would expect that, on the way back, they will try again. So the Prophet ﷺ, when it was near the time of their return, sent 2 of his companions, Talha ibn Ubaidullah and Sa'id ibn Zayd. He sent them to scout and see if the caravan is on their way back. So they went northward and they started to scout, and they stayed at a place known as Al-Hawra for a few days until they saw Abu Sufyan and his caravan passing. And they immediately rushed back to tell the Prophet ﷺ of their discovery. So they reported to the Prophet ﷺ that Abu Sufyan was returning with the caravan, and it had the wealth of Quraysh in it, the amount of 50,000 gold dinars and 1,000 camels, and he was only guarded by 30 to 40 men. So then the Prophet ﷺ said to his companions, "Here is the caravan of Quraysh, in which is their riches. So go out and intercept it. Maybe Allah will give it to you as booty." So it was not a war, and there was no order that was made that everyone had to go out, and those that remained behind were not urged to go out. It was just trying to intercept the caravan. And we know that we discussed that Uthman ibn Affan, for example, radiallahu anhu, remained in Badr because Ruqayya, the daughter of the Prophet ﷺ, was ill and she was dying. So why is it that the Muslims then are trying to intercept and take away someone else's wealth? Can this be comparable to some kind of highway robbery or something? The explanation is that the Muslims who had left Mecca, they had lost everything. Some of them came out with nothing but the shirt on their backs. They had lost all their possessions and all their wealth, and even the houses that were in were physically taken over. Other people moved in and lived in them. So they had lost a lot of money, and it was unjustly that they lost this money. So now it was their chance to take back what is rightfully theirs. So it was their chance to take back their wealth from the Quraysh. So in that sense, it wasn't robbery, it was just in a sense getting even. So the Prophet ﷺ gathered in what is narrated to be from around 300 to 317 of his companions, of which 82 to 86 of them were from the immigrants and the rest from the Ansar. And they had 70 camels with them, so we're talking over 300 people, and they had 70 camels. So they would alternate. 3 people would ride 1 camel, alternating. 2 would walk, and then 1 would ride, and then they would switch. And they had only 2 horses. One belonging to Zubair ibn al-Awwam, and the other of al-Miqdad ibn al-Aswad al-Kindi. So the Prophet ﷺ himself also, as you would expect from him ﷺ, he was sharing a camel with 2 people, Ali ibn Abi Talib and a man by the name of Abu Lubaba ibn Abdul Munzir. And Badr itself was 100 miles from Medina, so you can imagine the distance that the Prophet ﷺ had to walk. And it wasn't that he was a young man at the time. The Prophet ﷺ was 55 years old at that time. And Abu Lubaba and Ali radiallahu anhuma, they felt embarrassed that they're going to ride while the Prophet ﷺ walks. So they said to him, "We shall walk instead of you." And then you can expect the response from the Prophet ﷺ. He said to them, "You two are not stronger than me to walk, and I am not less in need of the reward than you." This is the Prophet ﷺ saying he is not less in need of the reward. So when the Prophet ﷺ had left with his army, he had left Abdullah ibn Maktoum as the Amir of Medina. And he's famous for being the blind man who used to make the second adhan of Fajr. So he left him in charge of Medina. Then they reached a place called Al-Rawha, and he sent Abu Lubaba back to Medina to be the Amir there. And that's why you will find in narrations that the 3rd person was a man by the name of Marthad ibn Abi Marthad, who was sharing the camel. And this is both narrations are correct because Abu Lubaba had returned to Medina. So the Prophet ﷺ then divided his army into 2. The immigrants were led, the raya, which is the standard. The standard was given to Ali ibn Abi Talib. He's one of the great heroes of Islam, one of the greatest warriors of Islam. They used to say, "La fata illa Ali." Like, there is no young man except Ali. It's the equivalent of, when someone is called the man, that he's the only one. So he used to say that he's the only youth. That's how excellent he was in battle. And the standard of the Ansar was given to Sa'd ibn Mu'adh, who was one of the leaders of the Ansar. Then the right flank of the army was given to one of the great heroes of Islam, Az-Zubayr ibn al-Awwam, a terrific warrior of Islam. A man who had a wound on the back of his neck so big that his 2-year-old child would put his fist into it. Allahu Akbar. A man that split a man in 2. During the Battle of Khandaq, a man tried to sneak into where the Muslims were. And Zubayr chased him, and as he was running, he struck him in his shoulder so hard that the blow went across, and the man fell on the ground in 2 pieces. Allahu Akbar. The left flank of the army was given to a man by the name of Al-Miqdad ibn Amr, and the rear was given to a man named Qais ibn Abi Sa'sa'a. And the general leadership was given to a man by the name of Mus'ab ibn Umair. He was from Quraysh, and he was given a white standard. And the commander-in-chief was the Prophet ﷺ. Here we'll take a quick pause to talk about this standard. What exactly is the standard? And what is the importance of it? You always hear the standard was given to so-and-so, and then he fell and so-and-so took it from him. It's like a long pole that has a flag on it. Now, why is this important that one person holds a flag in the middle of battle? Standard is extremely important. For one, when these battles, and we can't imagine them, but they were extremely rough and they were vicious, and attacks would come in waves. And if you read the stories of someone trying to catch someone in battle to fight him or to kill him, that he would attack him and then a wave would come and then he wouldn't be able to see him and then another wave would come. So these battles were very fierce. So how do you know where you are and where your group is during the battle? You look up and you see the standard. And you know that this is the stronghold. And if someone is wounded, he tries to move towards that area. And if the Muslims or any army wants to regroup, they know that's the area they go to. So the person, the standard bearer, was very important. And on top of that, he was mustahdaf. He was very sought after. That the other army would always try to hit the standard bearer. That way they break up the army and they wouldn't know where to regroup and so on. And that's why it was always given to the tough, strong warriors. And that's why Ali ibn Abi Talib was given the standard in the Battle of Badr. So then, another question is, why is it that the Prophet ﷺ put the Muhajirin together and put the Ansar together? Was that the division of the Muslims and so on? Part of it is that when you put people in the groups that they're accustomed to, that group, they know how to operate well together, and they don't want to be the reason for losing the battle. So the Ansar will do their best to do their part, be strong in the battle. And the Muhajirin will do their best to be strong in their part of the battle. Because if they lose, then they'll be the ones to blame. So that's part of the wisdom of keeping the people in their groups. And it's not to separate and divide between them. So then the Prophet ﷺ and this army marched toward Badr, the area of Badr. And when they reached a place called As-Safra, he dispatched 2 scouts to look for the caravans of Quraysh. Now Abu Sufyan, of course later he became Muslim, but for our story, for our purpose, he was the biggest enemy of Islam. Now, he was a smart man also, and this means because he was not a Muslim, he was not intelligent. He was intelligent, and he knew that they tried to intercept him on his way going, so it makes sense that they would try to intercept him on his way coming back. So, he sent a man by the name of Damdam ibn Amr al-Ghifari. Damdam is a strange man. A man who loves dramatic entrances. He loves these things. So what happened? He rushed to Mecca. Abu Sufyan sent him so that the Quraysh could send an army to support him before he's intercepted and they lose their wealth. So this man Damdam gets on his riding animal and he rushes to Mecca. And he makes a very dramatic entrance. He enters in and takes his sword and cuts off the nose and the ears of his camel, flips the saddle upside down, tears his shirt, and stands on top of the camel and starts to yell, "O people of Quraysh, the caravan, the caravan! Your wealth with Abu Sufyan is being intercepted by Muhammad and his companions. And I don't think you can reach them in time. Help, help!" And he's screaming. So then the Quraysh gather quickly. And they immediately start rushing and preparing for war. And they even invite some of the other Arab tribes to join them. And in an effort to race and save their caravan, they raise up an army of 1,300 warriors. 100 of them are horsemen. And the horsemen had a special place in the battles. Much more effective. It's like maybe the equivalent of maybe a tank and a human or something in our days. And 600 of the soldiers were mailed soldiers, meaning they were armored. And they had 700 camels, and they took with them female singers. They were kuffar. So they took female singers to entertain them. At first, the Quraysh were afraid that Banu Bakr had a long history of wanting to get even with the Quraysh and so on. So they were afraid that if they would leave, that Banu Bakr would attack them from behind. So then here, Iblis, alayhi la'natullah, he comes to them in the form of Suraqa ibn Malik, and he assures them that nothing will happen to them from behind and so on, just so they can encourage them to go out and defeat the Muslims. So they set out. All their leaders went out in their pomp and in their arrogance, slaughtering 9 to 10 camels just like a picnic. And those included Abu Jahl, Utbah ibn Rabi'ah, and his brother Shayba ibn Rabi'ah, and Umayyah ibn Khalaf, all of the leaders of the Quraysh, except for Abu Lahab. Abu Lahab, and he was scared And also there's an old practice where if someone owed you money, a man by the name of Al-As ibn Hisham, he was supposed to give Abu Lahab some money, the amount of 4,000 dinars. So Abu Lahab told him, I'll forgive the debt, but just go out in my place to the battle. Alhamdulillah, they don't do this in America. Credit card company calls you need to go to, right? So, but then of course the Prophet ﷺ had made dua against Abu Jahl, so he's supposed to die, right? Should die. So what happens was, even though that he stayed, he was an unjust man, one day he hit a little boy. So his older sister comes and she has this big stick and she hits him on the head. And his head splits open and then he falls ill. He gets very horrific illness where his skin starts to fall and rot and fall off, and he died such a terrible death. 3 days before Damdam came with his dramatic entry, there was a woman by the name of Atika bint Abi Talib, and you can tell that she's related to the Prophet ﷺ. She had a dream in which a man came and he stood to the Quraysh at the hilltop, warning the Quraysh that in 3 days a lot of them will be killed. In another narration, that he slaughtered a camel and the blood of that camel entered every household of the Quraysh. So she tells this vision to Al-Abbas, the uncle of the Prophet ﷺ. But she tells him not to tell anyone. And then Al-Abbas tells it to Utbah ibn Rabi'ah and tells him not to tell anyone. And then he tells it to someone and he tells him the same thing. And so after all, the news had spread everywhere. So one day Al-Abbas is making tawaf around the Kaaba, and Abu Jahl says to him, since when did the women of your tribe start becoming clairvoyant? And now they can tell the future and these things. So Al-Abbas wanted to insult him, but that didn't happen. But it just shows you that fear was hurled into the heart of Abu Jahl, and that's one of the reasons he didn't go out. And in general, that fear was kind of in the hearts of all of the kuffar, even though they were pompous and arrogant and so on. Type. So we said that Abu Sufyan was intelligent, and on the way coming back to Mecca, he meets a man by the name of Majdi ibn Amr. So he asked him about the army of the Muslims, where are they? And he said, I have not seen anyone strange except for 2 riders who dismounted their camels at that hillock, a little hill, and they drank from a container of theirs, and then they went off again. So Abu Sufyan went to that place, and he looked at the place where they were, and he looked for the dung of the camel. And he took the dung, and he broke it into pieces in his hands, and he found the pit of dates, and date seeds. So he said, by Allah, this is the father of Medina. What does that mean? A lot of people here, you will even find this mistake in books, that he recognized the seed and said, oh, this is a kind of date that grows in Medina. But what happened was that Medina was known for a lot of the dates. They had a lot of dates. So they were the only people that could afford to feed dates to their animals. And they could give them maybe the lesser quality dates or something like that. But in the dung of the animals of Medina, you could find date seeds. So he knew that these 2 scouts were from Medina. That means they were for the Muslims. That means the army or someone's trying to intercept him. That's how he understood the situation. So he changed his direction. He left the main road that takes you to Mecca, and he started heading towards the coast, towards the Red Sea. He totally kind of diverted. And by doing that, he averted danger and sent a message to the Quraysh, to the army of the Quraysh, telling them that at this point they were in a location, and he sent them a note saying that the caravan is safe, so return. So here, a disagreement started between the Quraysh. Abu Jahl, in his jahl, he said that by Allah, we will not return until we reach Badr, and we camp there for 3 nights, and we slaughter camels, and we feast on food and drink wine, and the girls will sing and make music for us, and the Arabs hear of us and of our great numbers, so they may remain in fear of us forever. So what he's trying to do, he's trying to have this big kind of a party and destroy the Muslims. So it would be said that these people were having fun and quickly exterminated the Muslims. This is in his arrogance and his pomp and his jahl. They all agreed with him. They liked the idea. This is a great idea. Except for one man, and his name was Al-Akhnas ibn Shariq. And he was the leader of the tribe of Banu Zahra. and he didn't like this idea, and he said, we're returning to Mecca. So, of course, because after they returned to Mecca, they heard what happened to the army. It is narrated that after that day, they started to follow this man blindly. Anything he would say, they would listen, because he saved them on the day of Badr. Returning with them also was Talib ibn Abi Talib. And the situation of Banu Hashim, or the branch of the tribe of the Prophet ﷺ, was that they were forced to come out on this war. They were forced to come out because the Quraysh kept accusing them that you have affinity to the Muslims, and because you're relatives of Muhammad ﷺ, that's why you don't want to come out to battle. So they were forced to come out to battle. And that's why later on we'll see the Prophet ﷺ forbade that they kill anyone from Banu Hashim. So now the army, because Banu Zahra had left them, was composed of 1,000 soldiers, and they arrived at Badr at a place known as Al-Udwatul Quswa. And we'll discuss the importance of this place and the importance of why they camped in this place. So the situation now changed drastically. It's no longer a caravan that's going to be intercepted where it was 30 to 40 men against 300 of the Muslims. Now it was the Quraysh, and they have experience, and the Muslims were relatively inexperienced. Second, they were well equipped, the Quraysh. They had prepared, and they brought all their power and their strength and their armors with them. They were very well equipped. The Muslims were poorly equipped, because there were 300 people going to meet 30 or 40 men. How much do you have to prepare for that? Then the third thing was that their army was very large in number, 3 times that of the Muslim army. So then some Muslims heard of the approach of the army, and they feared that they were going to battle. So they tried to convince the Prophet ﷺ that we shouldn't go into battle and so on. And in this instance, some ayat were revealed in Surah Al-Anfal, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم,
كما أخرجك ربك من بيتك بالحق وإن فريقا من المؤمنين لكارهون يجادلونك في الحق بعدما تبين كأنما يساقون إلى الموت وهم ينظرون وإذ يعدكم الله إحدى الطائفتين أنها لكم وتودون أن غير ذات الشوكة تكون لكم ويريد الله أن يحق الحق بكلماته ويقطع دابر الكافرين.
So here Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, as your Lord caused you, O Muhammad, to go out from your home with the truth, and verily a party among the believers disliked it. This is speaking about those people who didn't like this idea of going to battle. Disputing with you concerning the truth after it was made manifest, as if they were being driven to death while they were looking at it. So here the Prophet ﷺ saw the situation, and he wanted to see exactly the situation of his men. And this is from the wisdom of the Prophet ﷺ. You don't enter into a battle not knowing the morale of your men. How much they're behind him. Are they behind him 100%, or just a little bit of excitement? So then the Prophet ﷺ wanted to hear from them. And so the first person that spoke was Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu. He got up and he spoke well. But then this is the companion of the Prophet ﷺ and his best friend and the most beloved of people to him. So he wanted to hear from other people. He would expect that Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu would follow him. So then Umar radiallahu anhu got up and he spoke well. And then Al-Miqdad ibn Amr got up and he spoke. And he said, O Messenger of Allah, proceed to wherever Allah guides you, for we are with you. By Allah, we shall not tell you what Banu Israel told Musa. Go you and your Lord and fight, we will remain here seated. But go you and your Lord and fight, and we shall be fighting with you. I swear by him who has sent you with the truth, if you took us to Birk al-Ghimad, we would fight with you against anyone who blocks our path, until we are able to reach it. So the Prophet ﷺ then felt that he has the support at least of the immigrants. But he still wanted to hear from the Ansar. So then he thanked Al-Miqdad and he made dua for him. And then he said, advise me, O people. So he wanted to hear from the Ansar in particular, for 2 reasons. The obvious one is that they were the majority of the army. The majority of the army was composed of the Ansar. So he wanted to see what they thought. And likewise, when the Ansar gave the Prophet ﷺ the pledge at Aqaba, he did not specifically say that they're just going to defend him anywhere. They said that they're not obligated to defend the Prophet ﷺ until he reaches their land. Once he reaches their land, they're obligated to defend him, and they would defend him from anything from which they defend or protect their women and children against. So now this is a different situation. The pledge is one thing, and this is a situation where Medina is not under attack. They're not compelled to defend the Prophet ﷺ. So he wanted to know if they would assist him in this situation also. And that's why he said, advise me, O people. So here, Sa'ad ibn Mu'adh, who is the standard bearer of the army, of the part of the Ansar, we said, he said, by Allah, perhaps you're referring to us, O Messenger of Allah, meaning the Ansar. And the Prophet ﷺ said, Ajal. He said, yes. So then he spoke, and he spoke well. He said, we have believed in you and accepted what you say. We have testified that what you have brought is the truth, and on the basis of that we have given you our pledge and swore to hear and obey you. So proceed, O Messenger of Allah, to do whatever you will, for we are with you. By Him who has sent you with the truth, if you approached the sea with us and dived into it, we would dive into it with you, and not a single man would remain behind. We do not dislike that you should confront the enemy with us tomorrow. We are steadfast in war, truthful in meeting. Perhaps Allah will show you something of us which will make your heart pleased. So proceed on the blessings of Allah. So here the Prophet ﷺ then was confident of the morale of his men and of how much his men are going to back him up and how much they support him in this battle. Then Sa'ad ibn Mu'adh radiallahu anhu, he suggests that they build a trellis, which is like a tent, and from which it would be the headquarters of the Prophet ﷺ, and it would be a protection for him, and he could plan the movements of the army and all these things from this base. And the Prophet ﷺ liked the idea, and they started to build that. And Sa'ad ibn Mu'adh himself was made head of the guards of the Prophet ﷺ. Now on their way to Badr, it is narrated that a mushrik came and offered to fight with them. It is described that this man was known for jur'ah, that he was daring, and he didn't like to see injustice. You know, some people, they see someone doing something unjust, is being unfair to someone, they go to him. Even if they don't know, they walk up to him. They don't like to see injustice. And other people, they ignore it. He was of the kind that didn't like to see injustice. So he saw this huge army coming to fight these 300 Muslims. So he came to the Prophet ﷺ, and he offered to fight with the Muslims. And he was a mushrik. So what did the Prophet ﷺ tell him? Irji' falan asta'ina bi mushrik. So he told him, go back, I do not seek the aid of a mushrik. So the Prophet ﷺ told him to go back. So he asked the Prophet ﷺ again in a different location. And then he asked again in a third location. He went 2 times again, he's asking the Prophet ﷺ. The Prophet ﷺ is telling him to go back. And then they told him to become a Muslim, and he became a Muslim, and then the Prophet ﷺ accepted him. Then there's another story that's very popular. You always find it in the books of Seerah. Even the very accurate books of Seerah, they mention this story because it is mentioned a lot. The story of Al-Habbab ibn al-Mundhir, where he said to the Prophet ﷺ when they camped at a particular place, O Prophet of Allah, is this place a revelation? Meaning we cannot move forward or backward. Allah told you to camp here. Or is this place of your own opinion? And the Prophet ﷺ told him, it's my own opinion and a stratagem of war. So then he suggested that we should move the army to another place and so on. The problem is that some Muslims now, they use this story as evidence that what the Prophet ﷺ says, if you have a better opinion, then you can do that. You see? There are 2 problems with that. And we hear this a lot, and some of them are pretty well-known speakers and so on. They always say that Al-Habbab ibn al-Mundhir made this suggestion, and he suggested over the opinion of the Prophet ﷺ. The problem with that is, the Prophet ﷺ is not here anymore, so we can ask him, is this revelation, or is this your opinion? That's the first thing. The second thing is that of every single narration of this story, there is not a single one that's sahih. You see? So, and you'll see some books, you find in the footnotes that they mention that there is not a single sahih narration of this story, but there are many narrations of it, and that's why it can be mentioned. And I just thought to mention that because a lot of people, unfortunately, at our time, they try to push aside the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ and put their opinions on before that. So in any case, the Muslims camped near the wells of Badr. There were some wells for water at Badr. So they camped, they put themselves between the kuffar, between the wells. So in a sense, they camped in a way so that they could prevent the kuffar from coming to drink water. And this was another stratagem. Now the Prophet ﷺ and Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, they went out to scout, to see, find some news and so on. So they found an old man and they asked him about the whereabouts of the army of the Quraysh. And he stipulated that he will tell them, but they have to tell him where they're from. He's a nosy man, he wants to know where they're from. So they agreed, but he had to tell them first. They told him, we agree, but you tell us first about what we asked you. So he told them that he heard that Muhammad ﷺ and his companions left, meaning left Medina, on such and such a day. And if the person had told him the truth, then by now they should have reached such and such a place. And the place that he named was exactly where the Muslims were. So he is calculating that if they left that day, by now they should be in that area. And he was accurate. And then he said, and if the person who told me spoke the truth, the army of the Quraysh should be in such and such a place. And it was exactly where the army of the Quraysh was. So then when he was done telling them what they wanted to hear, then he said, so where are you from? And then the Prophet ﷺ said to him, min ma'. Min ma', ma' is water. So he told him, min ma', and they started to leave. So they left him saying, and it's narrated that they left him saying, min ma', amin ma' al-Iraq. So ma' is water. The Prophet ﷺ didn't want to tell him that he's the Prophet of Allah and he's had the army right over here, because this is part of and the success and the strategy of warfare, not to disclose your location and tell other information. So the Prophet ﷺ told him that, he asked him, where are you from? And the way the question is asked in Arabic could also mean, what are you made from? What are you created from? And the Prophet ﷺ told him, min ma', and people are created from water, they have water. So while there was also a city in Iraq, and it was called Ma', and that's why he said, amin ma' al-Iraq, is it from Ma' in Iraq? But they ignored him, they just kept going. So Prophet ﷺ did not lie, he told them the truth, but the other man understood it in a different way. And this is permissible, especially at times of war. Then at night the Prophet ﷺ sent people to scout again. He sent Ali ibn Abi Talib and Zubayr ibn al-Awwam and Sa'ad ibn Abi Waqqas radiyallahu anhuma. He sent them to see what's the news and what's going on. So they found two water boys of the Quraysh who came to gather water for the army. They brought them back to the camp and they started to question them. In some narration they just questioned them severely. In one narration they beat them. So first they asked them what they're doing, and they told them that they were out in search of water to bring to the army. And in the narration that the Prophet ﷺ was praying meanwhile, so he could hear what they were saying. The companions were really interested in the caravan mostly. They were so outnumbered, and they're not as keen on the war as they were on the caravan. So they kept asking, they beat them so that they can tell them something about the caravan. So then they lied to them about the caravan, because they were beaten. And then, when the Prophet ﷺ finished praying, he came to them. And he was surprised at them. He said, when they tell you the truth, you beat them. And when they lie, you let them go. So then the Prophet ﷺ came and he started to question them. And we'll see the wisdom of the Prophet ﷺ in doing this. And this was, what do I say? People just recently in Europe in the Dark Ages, they used to, if someone was accused of something, they would bring him and they would torture him to say he did it. Or they would, put a piece of metal and they bring it to you red hot. Did you steal the apple? No, they bring you this red piece of, yes, I stole the apple. You lie because there's pain coming your way, so you admit to something else. So the Prophet ﷺ, he had more wisdom than that. So he brought the boys and he asked them, what news do you have of Quraysh? And they said, they're behind that mound that you see. It's behind this hill. The army is camped behind there. The Prophet ﷺ asked them, how many are they? They said, there are very many. So the Prophet ﷺ said, what are their numbers? They said, we don't know. And the Prophet ﷺ said, a very intelligent question, how many camels do they slaughter every day? And the boys responded, between 9 and 10. Then the Prophet ﷺ said, the people are between 900 and 1,000. You see the intelligence. Very accurate, 900 and 1,000. And this is of the intelligence of the Prophet ﷺ and also in his fairness in dealing with people. So then he asked the boys which of the leaders are with them, and they named them, all the major leaders of Quraysh. And then in some narration the Prophet ﷺ pointed to the places where all of these leaders will die. And in one narration that he put his hand on the places where they will be found dead. In another he just pointed to all the places where they will be killed. And people who saw him point to these places, and they testified later that not a single one of them died in another place besides where the Prophet ﷺ pointed. They all died where the Prophet ﷺ pointed that they would die. Then there's a narration by Ali ibn Abi Talib, or a story narrated by him radiallahu anhu, that he says that when we were at Badr, that everyone was sleeping. This is at night time. So this is Thursday, the eve of Friday, the 17th of Ramadan. He describes that everyone was sleeping except for the Prophet ﷺ, who was praying under a tree. And he did not sleep until morning. He was just praying and making dua the whole time. Then he said it started to rain. So people woke up and they started to move under the trees. And the Prophet ﷺ kept praying. And he would say, "Oh Allah, if this small band perishes, if this small group of men, of believers perishes today, you will not be worshipped again on earth." And the Prophet ﷺ continued praying until dawn. The time for dawn prayer came, and he woke up the believers for prayer. Two things that happened that night were the rain and the sleep that came to the believers. Of a narration about the sleep, Anas ibn Malik ibn Abu Talha narrates that he said, "Sleep overcame us on the day of Badr." He describes how his sword would fall. He would fall asleep, so his sword would fall from his hand, and he would pick it up, and it would fall, and he would pick it up again. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says about this in Al-Quran, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم,
إذ يغشيكم النعاس أمنة منه وينزل عليكم من السماء ماء ليطهركم به ويذهب عنكم رجز الشيطان وليربط على قلوبكم ويثبت به الأقدام.
This is in Surah Al-Anfal, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, mentioning this, "Remember He covered you with drowsiness to give you calm as from Himself, and He caused rain to descend on you from heaven to clear you with, to remove from you the stain of shaitan, to strengthen your hearts and to plant your feet firmly therewith." So after the long march of the Muslims and so on, this sleep was refreshing for them. And where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says the rain, to remove from you the stain of the shaitan and to strengthen your hearts and to plant your feet firmly therewith, it was both ways, in the spiritual sense and also physically, because the land where the Muslims were camped is, when the rain came down, the land became harder. It was easy to run on, and it was easy for the horses also to gallop on the sand after it became wet. While just less than a mile away where the kuffar were camped, the rain there made everything sluggish and made it muddy and made it difficult to run and slippery and made it difficult for the horses also. So even though the distance was so small, the difference in the ground, how it was beneficial on the side of the Muslims, and it was detrimental or the worst for the kuffar. Then one of the kuffar, Umayr ibn Wahab, he went and did some more scouting to see what the Muslims were up to, and he came back and told the army of the Quraysh that the army of the Muslims consists of 300 men, all of them willing to fight until the last man. So this again shook the hearts of the kuffar again. And Utbah ibn Rabi'a, one of their leaders, he didn't want to fight, and he said that we should return and we shouldn't fight. So then Abu Jahl started to accuse him of being a coward and being afraid and so on. And some narrations that he challenged his own sons, and they started to do a kind of a sword fight in front of him to show that they're brave and so on. So in that sense there was disunity among their leadership. Before we looked at the advantages and disadvantages, and the Muslims were at a disadvantage. And now after some events, we find that the Muslims have unity in leadership while the kuffar have disunity. And we find that the Muslims have enthusiasm, and they're all expecting and seeking reward and seeking paradise, while the kuffar on the other side, they have overconfidence, because they have overconfidence in their numbers, while at the same time they have low morale. So the mixture of both of them. While on the other side, the Muslims, they're very organized. Their ranks are organized very well. And the Prophet ﷺ brought a new strategy into Arabian warfare, which we're going to discuss. So then it was Friday. It was the morning of Friday, the 17th of Ramadan, the morning of the battle itself. And the Prophet ﷺ made dua. And then he started to straighten the lines of his companions, just making sure that the lines are nice and straight. And he was doing that with, in one narration, something called a qidh, which is an arrow without the feathers on the one end. You know, the feathers that guide the arrow. Without that, and he was using that to straighten. In another narration was a urjun, which is, it's part of a date palm. I mean, part of the tree of the date palm. It's like a long stick, but it's kind of crooked a little or something. So in any case, the Prophet ﷺ is straightening the lines like this. And then a man by the name of Sawad ibn Ghaziyya was a little bit in front of the line. So the Prophet ﷺ poked him in his stomach. He told him, Istawi ya Sawad. So then he said, you have hurt me. He said to the Prophet that you've hurt me. And he wanted to get even, to hit the Prophet ﷺ back. So then the Prophet ﷺ is a fair man. He gave it to him and he revealed his stomach. So then Sawad jumps and hugs the Prophet ﷺ and he starts to kiss his stomach. So then the Prophet ﷺ told him, what made you do that? And he told him, I wanted the last thing for me to be my skin touching your skin. And the Prophet ﷺ made dua for him. So these are the type of men that are in this army. This is how much they love their leader. And we'll see other examples. But compare this to the morale that the army of the Quraysh have. Then the Prophet ﷺ gave instructions. The Prophet ﷺ said, if they draw near you, shoot them with arrows. And he, in another narration, to use the arrows sparingly. And do not unsheathe your swords. Do not take out your swords until they are upon you. They're very close to you. Now, typically, the strategy in the warfare of the Arabs, it used to be that the champions, the heroes, would step out of their ranks, and then they would start to hurl insults at the other group, and then they would start to speak of their achievement, and then they would challenge them to single combat, duels. Then the second stage was they would start these duels. The champions of this army against those of the other army, and they would duel. Everyone else is watching. Then, when that's over with, they have the general mix-up. They just charge, and it's a general mix-up. And this is where the Prophet ﷺ made the change. That when they charge, we're going to hurl arrows at them sparingly. Until they get very close, then we're going to take out the swords and do the mix-up. So the Prophet ﷺ then, on top of all this, he's motivating his soldiers. And we see this after the death of the Prophet ﷺ in the battles during the reign of Umar radiallahu anhu and so on. There would be huge armies, 30,000 men, and they would have someone to go in the ranks and read Qur'an, and read the ayat of jihad and istishhad and so on. You would have a lot of people going in and just reading these ayat. They would pick people with loud and beautiful voices. This is how they used to raise morale. So the Prophet ﷺ was telling his men, by him in whose hand is Muhammad's soul, there is not a man that fights them today, meaning fights the unbelievers, and dies today, while being patient and seeking the reward, not fleeing away, meaning not running away from the army, except that Allah will enter him into paradise. And then the Prophet ﷺ tells them, قُومُوا إِلَى جَنَّةٍ عَرْضُهَا السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ. Get up to these heavens whose width is that of the heavens and the earth. At that time there was a young man by the name of Umair ibn al-Humam. And he was a young man of 16 years old. And he said, O Prophet of Allah, a paradise whose width is that of the heavens and the earth? And the Prophet ﷺ told him, yes. And he said, Bakhin, bakhin. What does that mean, bakhin, bakhin? It's an expression of wonder and pleasure in Arabic. It's the equivalent of the in English. Or another narration, So, then the Prophet ﷺ asked him, what makes you say bakhin, bakhin? He told him, by Allah, O Messenger of Allah, it is only with the hope that I shall be of its inhabitants. And then the Prophet ﷺ told him that that he is one of its inhabitants. Then he took out dates, and you will find in the books of Seerah in English that he took out dates from his horn. And that's strange. That why does he have a horn? What is a horn exactly? How do you take dates out of a horn? And the word in Arabic is qarnahu, which is horn, but it's also another word for a quiver. A quiver is what you put arrows in. So he took some dates out of the quiver of his arrows, and he started to eat them. Then he threw them away. He said, if I live until I finish these dates, it will be a long life. And if I live until I'm finish every one of these dates, this is a long life. Threw them away. He wanted martyrdom. Then the Prophet ﷺ gave instructions not to kill the people of Banu Hashim, the people of the branch of the tribe of the Prophet ﷺ. Because we said that they were forced to come out to this battle. People were accusing them that they have an affinity to the Muslims, and because they're relatives of the Prophet ﷺ, so they were forced to come out just to prove that we're all kuffar and all that stuff. So the Prophet ﷺ gave instructions not to kill any of them. Specifically, Al-Abbas, the uncle of the Prophet ﷺ, and a man also from Banu Hashim by the name of Al-Bukhtari. So then Abu Hudayfa heard this, and he said, we kill our fathers and sons and relatives and spare Al-Abbas. He says, by Allah, if I find him, I'll strike him with my sword. So then the news of this reaches the Prophet ﷺ, and Umar radiallahu anhu was with him. So he said, oh Abu Hafs, and that was the matronymic of Umar. Some say because of his daughter Hafsa, or some say the Prophet ﷺ in another narration named him Abu Hafs, because Hafs is a lion cub, that's what it is. The Prophet ﷺ gave him this name, and he became known by that. So he said, oh Abu Hafs, is it right that the face of the uncle of the Messenger of Allah should be struck with a sword? And then Umar was upset, and he said, O Messenger of Allah, allow me to strike the neck of Hudayfa. He has nafaq, he has done something of hypocrisy. And then Hudayfa radiallahu anhu comments saying that he felt bad for what he said that day, and he kept, for the rest of his life, he felt that nothing will expiate what he said except shahada. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala granted that to him in the day of Yamama. Then the battle starts. And the first incident, the first death before the battle, was a man by the name of Al-Aswad ibn Abdul Asad. And he was known as a wild mushrik with a very bad temper. So he came out, he's not very intelligent, we can tell also. He came out because they couldn't reach the water basin. The Muslims were near it and they were protecting it. These people were thirsty and they wanted to drink. This man came out, he said, I pledge to Allah that either I will drink from this basin, or destroy it, or die trying. Man has no brains. So he heads towards this basin. And who does he meet for his luck? He meets the lion of Allah, Hamza ibn Abdul Muttalib. So Hamza comes to him and he cuts his leg off. He hits him in the shin. So he takes his leg off from the shin. So the man, look at this stubborn man. But subhanAllah, there's also a lesson. He's not a Muslim, but he pledged to Allah. His leg got cut off, he started crawling towards the basin because he made a pledge. Perhaps that should be a note there for the Muslims when they make a pledge or swear by Allah. Because he made a pledge, he insisted. So he started crawling towards the basin, and then Hamza radiallahu anhu charged at him again and struck him and killed him, and he died inside the basin. So then we come to the first part of the battles where the duels start. So then from the kuffar, Utbah ibn Rabi'ah and his brother Shayba ibn Rabi'ah came out, and Al-Walid ibn Utbah. These three came out and they said they want a challenge from the Muslims to come out and challenge them to a duel. So then three men from the Ansar went out, and they are Al-Awf and Mu'awwidh, who are the sons of Al-Harith, and the third one was Abdullah ibn Rawaha. But then the Quraysh, they said, we don't want these, send us some of our people that fled to Medina, send us some of those people. So then the Prophet ﷺ says, arise Ubayd ibn al-Harith, arise Hamza, arise Ali. Allahu Akbar. The men, he chose strong men. If you remember Ubaidah ibn al-Harith, we said in one narration he was the first husband of Zaynab bint Khuzaymah, and he was martyred in the Battle of Badr. He actually died as a result of the wound. Actually, it said that he died as a result of a disease in the bile duct, but it was after being wounded at Badr. So then Hamza, the lion of Allah, killed Utbah ibn Rabi'ah very quickly. So quickly it's not described much. He just quickly killed him. Ali ibn Abi Talib killed Shayba ibn Rabi'ah quickly. Then Ubayd and Al-Walid, they kept fighting, and they both wounded each other. And it is said that the wound that Ubaidah radiallahu anhu received was that his leg was cut off also. And with that, Ali ibn Abi Talib and Hamza quickly jumped on Al-Walid and killed him. And in one narration, Hamza quickly struck him and took his head off. So then more duels took place, and is not mentioned the names of those people that were involved in that. Then the Prophet ﷺ asked Ali radiallahu anhu to give him a handful of sand, like sand and gravel and so on. He took it and he threw it. And it says that there was not one of the army of the Quraysh except that it came into their face and into their eyes. Every one of the kuffar. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also mentions this in the Quran, وَمَا رَمَيْتَ إِذْ رَمَيْتَ وَلَكِنَّ اللَّهَ رَمَى, that, and you threw not when you threw, but it was Allah who threw. And then the battle starts, and the details of that tomorrow inshallah. جزاكم الله خير على حسن استماعكم وصلى اللهم وبارك على محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله الأمين. So we stopped yesterday where we mentioned that the battle began yesterday with the duels at the beginning, and we said that was the system, that the champions would come out, then they would insult each other or mention their achievements, and then they would start to one-on-one sword fights or duels, and then the general mix-up would start. We said some of the leaders of the Quraysh, the army of the Quraysh, stepped out and they asked the Muslims to bring out some people to fight them. And some of the Ansar stepped out and then they refused to fight them. They wanted to fight people from Mecca. So the Prophet ﷺ then ordered Abu Hudayfa, Ubayd ibn al-Harith, and Hamza ibn Abdul Muttalib, and Ali ibn Abi Talib. And we see the choice here. We find that Ubayd ibn al-Harith ibn Abdul Muttalib. So he was one of the relatives of the Prophet ﷺ, and Hamza is the uncle of the Prophet ﷺ, and Ali, the son of his uncle, which is nephew, right? Cousin, afwan. So the Prophet ﷺ is setting another example. He's bringing out his own relatives, not bringing people he doesn't know. You go out. He's bringing his own relatives to go out, and there's a lesson in that as well. And then it is narrated that there were more duels, and in each one of these duels the kuffar suffered some precious lives. So this made them extremely enraged, and they were extremely mad at this. So they charged. The third step, they all charged. The entire army running at the Muslims. And if you remember, the Prophet ﷺ, we said, had given commands, and this was the new strategy that he had introduced to the warfare in Arabia, that they would hold their positions and shoot them with arrows sparingly. Just throw them with arrows until they get very close, then they would unsheath their swords and start to battle out. Then the Prophet ﷺ also introduced something new, and that was as-sufuf, that he lined up the companions in straight rows. And the general mix-up was just a mess, but the Prophet ﷺ organized them in straight rows, where archers in the first row would throw their arrows, and then the next row would throw, and so on. And this was different because the warfare of the Arabs before was known as the system, the strategy of al-kar wal-far. So they would charge, then they would retreat, and they'd give another strong charge, and then they would regroup again, and they would give another strong charge. And that's why you hear a lot of times about the battle being in waves. And it was like a wave. Hundreds and sometimes thousands upon thousands of people charging together, then they would return. So it would be a wave, and sometimes this wave would take you, or you would try to reach someone and the wave would push him or you away from him. So this was the change that the Prophet ﷺ had made in this battle. So they remained steadfast, throwing their arrows at the kuffar until they got very close. Then the Prophet ﷺ and then the companions unsheathed their swords, and the general mix-up started. Here there are a lot of things that occur. One of them is that to withstand that first charge, if you can hold that first attack, then you can start to counter. But you have to stand that first attack. If the first attack breaks you, then you have a problem. So here the Prophet ﷺ also said another example in the battlefield, and we have a description from Ali radiallahu anhu, and look at who is giving this description. Ali ibn Abi Talib radiallahu anhu was a young man, and he was a very, very powerful warrior. And his heroics we'll discuss later on inshallah when we speak about Ali radiallahu anhu. But he was a very powerful warrior. And they used to say, La fata illa Ali, like there's no youth, there's no young man except Ali. It's like our equivalent of, he's the man. Ali ibn Abi Talib is the one who is giving this testimony. He said, on the day of Badr, we would seek protection with the area in which the Prophet ﷺ was. That's like if there's like a big rumble or a big fight and there's one big guy, he's your friend, you try to stay near his area. He'll protect you from the rest. So this is one of the fiercest warriors, and he's saying that we used to seek protection with the area where the Messenger of Allah ﷺ was, and he was the closest one of us to the enemy, and he was the fiercest of the people. Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. Yeah, naam.
Prophet ﷺ never fought at Badr, he was at the end, and this statement was at Hunayn.
La. This statement was that this is in one of the very this book of Sirah is actually the textbook of in Medina. It's very accurate, and especially in the order of how things took place. So you see that the Prophet ﷺ was in the back in the Arish that Sa'ad ibn Mu'adh suggested that they build, and he was there, and even until the time when the battle in some books started, he was still making dua, and then Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu would put his cloak on, and then he came and charged after Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told him that the angels will support them and so on, which we will get into the details of that tomorrow. In this one in particular, he says, on the day of Badr, we sought the protection with the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and he was the closest one of us to the enemy, and he was the fiercest of the people. So, and this also shows that a good leader sets the example in courage. And unlike we have, you hear these famous statements of the leaders, of the kuffar. You hear Churchill, we shall fight in the sea, we shall fight in the land, or we shall never surrender, or we will smoke them out of their holes. All this tough guy talk, but they're in a nice desk. But the Prophet ﷺ giving the example, his bravery in the battlefield. And so the Muslims then, they withstood the first waves of the attack by the kuffar. Then they started to fight them back with a lot of power and a lot of enthusiasm. Because we mentioned that the kuffar the night before, they started to lose their morale. And some of them wanted to go back, and some of them, they lost their enthusiasm for the battle. Yet the Muslims, they had more enthusiasm, which we saw in the examples of the young man, Umayr ibn al-Humam, and we'll see in other examples inshallah. So when they were able to withstand the first attack, then they attacked them with power and enthusiasm. And we'll pause a little bit to discuss the realities of these early battles and of early warfare. You look at these early battles and you find that in Uhud, for example, the kuffar were 3,000 and the Muslims were 1,000, and then only 70 people died. You look at the number of casualties, you find that they're pretty small. In Badr, 70 of the mushrikeen died and 14 of the Muslims died. And sometimes a battle will take an entire day, and sometimes 1,000 or less will die. And that is because it's a different type of warfare, and today maybe one bomb can kill more than that number of people. But back then these battles were with arrows and spears and swords, so you would spend, and it's very tiring, so you would strike with your sword and the person would block with his shield, and you would go on for a long time fighting like this. And sometimes you find that some people are having a conversation in the middle of the battle, so you wonder, how does that happen? That's because it's not like the warfare of today. They would charge and retreat, and then people would go away in the back and they could speak, and then they would go again. A battle could go for an entire day. Because sometimes you wonder, well, how can they be talking like this in the middle of the battle? So it wasn't that it was just continuous, and it's also very tiring. And like we said, they would attack and regroup and attack again. And another thing is that not every strike resulted in death. That's also for the number of casualties. With a sword, not every single strike will result in death unless it's in particular places. And that's why if you look at the battles in Arabic, they're known as al-malahim. And that comes from the word lahm, which is meat. Why are they called al-malahim? Because there's so much pieces get chopped off. Arms, ears, noses. You heard of the companion of the Prophet ﷺ whose nose was chopped off in a battle, and he made a nose of brass, and the Prophet ﷺ told him to make one of gold. And from that the ulama deduced you can put a gold tooth and so on. So they're called al-malahim because pieces of meat fall on the floor. And everyone dies from every strike of the sword. So, and that's the reason behind the number of casualties. And it's very, like I said, very tiring. Swinging these swords, which are very heavy. And they would swing and strike with swords, and sometimes swords would break. And we have in the battle of Badr an example of Ukash ibn Mihsan, whose sword broke. He fought with his sword until it broke. And then the Prophet ﷺ gave him a long piece of wood. And when he shook it, it became a long white sword. And Ukasha ibn Muhsin radiallahu anhu used that in every battle he took part in until he died in the apostasy wars. This is one of the miracles of Badr. Likewise, there was one battle where the Prophet ﷺ was, he had the sword and he kept saying, who will give the sword its right? And then one man would stand up and the Prophet ﷺ wouldn't give it to him. Who will give the sword its right? And then one man stood up. The Prophet ﷺ gave it to him. And then he asked him, what is the right of this sword? He said, أَن تَضْرِبَ بِهِ حَتَّى يَعْوَجْ, that you strike with it until it bends. And just imagine now you take a sword and you just go to a steel pole and you strike until it bends. It's very tiring. So this is the nature of these battles, and I just wanted that to give us a picture of, realistically, of how they were. So then the kuffar started to get defeated. And Abu Jahl, because he was bent on destroying the Muslims, he tried to gather them up and motivate them again. And he would say, by Al-Lat and Al-Uzza, we shall not return until we scatter them to the mountains. Charge them with force. He would try to encourage people. So then the remnants of the army of the Quraysh, they gathered around Abu Jahl. And they said, no one will get to Abu al-Hakam. Abu al-Hakam is the patronymic of the kunya of Abu Jahl. And they said they made a gathering, a thick gathering. He was in the middle of it. All these people around him, defending him. But then, in some narration, the Muslims were chanting, Ahadun Ahad. Ahad is like one, meaning they're speaking about Allah. And if you remember, Bilal radiallahu anhu was the one, when he was tortured, he would say, Ahadun Ahad. And the Muslims asked him, why did you say Ahadun Ahad? He said, I used to say a lot of things besides Ahadun Ahad. But I noticed that Ahad made them upset the most. So I kept saying it the most. Even though they were torturing him, he still wanted to upset them the most. So in some narration, the Muslims kept saying Ahadun Ahad, chopping down the trees around Abu Jahl, meaning the people, one by one. Then we have an interesting story narrated by Abdurrahman ibn Auf, who said that suddenly in the battle he found himself on his right and on his left two young youth. Now there are many narrations of this story in particular, but we'll take the most authentic of it. And there's some very long versions of it, and they all have weaknesses in them. So we'll take the short one, and it's the most authentic. That Abdurrahman ibn Auf says, he's describing himself, that he found himself between two young men in the middle of the battle. That in one narration they were around 14 years old, the oldest one of them. So he said that made him insecure. And if you look at the other narrations, you'll see that made him feel insecure. Imagine you're in an army and you're outnumbered 3-1, and you look to your right and there's a 14-year-old with a sword, and you look to your left, there's one younger than him with a sword. Makes you feel like, we're in trouble, you know. So he said that made him feel insecure. So then one of them whispered to him, says, Uncle, show me Abu Jahl. He says, my son, what do you want with him? He said, I have sworn to Allah that if I see him, I will kill him or die trying. This is a young man. And then the other said the same, show me Abu Jahl. So then he said, but he was whispering it to him, he didn't want the other one to hear. He wanted to be the first one to kill Abu Jahl. So then he says, I wouldn't have been more pleased if I was standing between two other men besides them. I was proud to be standing between these two other men. I would have been prouder if there were any other two. We felt very proud. He says, then I pointed to him. He showed them where he was. And he says they darted like two hawks at him, hitting him until he died. And some narrations describe the difficulty they had. They made an agreement. One would strike the horse. Once Abu Jahl fell, he was huge and fat. The young boy stood on top of him. He felt that if he struck his stomach, he wouldn't kill him. So he struck him at the neck. In any case, they went to him and jumped and hit him until he was dead. And then they went to the Prophet ﷺ and they announced that they had killed Abu Jahl. And he looked at their swords and he saw the blood on both swords, so he believed that both of them killed Abu Jahl. And this is one of the examples we were talking about, how in the middle of battle they go to announce something like this and show their swords to the Prophet ﷺ. So then the names of those boys were Mu'adh ibn Amr and Ibn Amr ibn al-Jamuh, the famous companion of the Prophet ﷺ, and Mu'awwidh ibn al-Afra, and he was killed later on in the Battle of Badr. So then when Abu Jahl fell, and he was the one that was rallying up the army of the Quraysh, the mushrikeen, they just scattered. That kind of broke the army. So then it's narrated that later Abdullah ibn Mas'ud goes and he's looking for Abu Jahl, and he finds him and there's a little bit of breath in him. And we look at this stubborn kafir. Abdullah ibn Mas'ud puts his foot on his chest. Now, Abdullah ibn Mas'ud was a very thin, very skinny man. But it's like Allah decreed that 3 of the smallest people would attack and kill one of the biggest enemies of Islam, Abu Jahl. So Abdullah ibn Mas'ud was very thin. He put his foot on the chest of Abu Jahl, and Abu Jahl, this stubborn kafir, is still saying, who was victorious in this battle? He's asking. So then Abdullah ibn Mas'ud tells him, Allah and His Messenger. Then he asks him, have you tasted the humiliation from Allah, you enemy of Allah? And he says to him, and how did He humiliate me? He says, is there any man stronger than the one who is killed by his own people? My own people killed me. So he's used that as a thing to show his strength. Then he looked at him, he peered at Abdullah ibn Mas'ud. He says, aren't you the little shepherd boy in Mecca? And Abdullah ibn Mas'ud delivered him some blows and he killed him. And there are other narrations of the killing of Abu Jahl, but this is the most authentic of them. One is long, where Abdullah ibn Mas'ud tries to take his head off and he's not able to. Then Abu Jahl tells him, won't you take my dagger and then start from the right side of my neck, and that way you'll kill me. But this is the most authentic, so we'll stay with that. But I just want to mention it so that as we're reading books of seerah and so on, we'll find different narrations of stories. But always look in the footnotes, you'll see they'll mention the sahih from the da'if. Likewise, one of the other leaders of the Quraysh that were killed was Umayyah ibn Khalaf, and he was one of their leaders. And he was a good friend of Abdurrahman ibn Auf. When Abdurrahman ibn Auf would go to Mecca, he would meet him there and let him stay with him and so on. So when he saw him captured, Abdurrahman ibn Auf dropped what was with him and he started walking with Umayyah ibn Khalaf. Umayyah ibn Khalaf was the man who tortured Bilal radiallahu anhu, if you remember the famous story. So when Bilal saw this, he said, Umayyah, the head of kufr, if he is safe today, then may I not be safe? He must be hurt today. So he started to gather the Ansar, Umayyah, and then they started to gather around him. Even though he was captured, they attacked him. And even though in a narration, an authentic narration, that Abdurrahman ibn Auf told him to kneel down and he covered him to try to protect him, and yet they still killed him. And this also shows that it's permissible that some of the equivalent of today's war criminals can be killed. Even though they have been taken as prisoners, they can still be killed. So in the end of the battle then, 70 of the mushrikeen are dead and 70 are captured. So that's 140 losses for the Quraysh. And 14 of the Muslims are martyred. We have the story of Haritha ibn Suraqa, who was standing guard for the Prophet ﷺ. And a stray arrow comes out of the army of the Quraysh, going all the way straight to Haritha ibn Suraqa and kills him. So then his mother comes to the Prophet ﷺ and she says, O Messenger of Allah, tell me about Haritha. If he is in Jannah, I will be patient. If he's martyred, I'll be patient. Now why is she asking the Prophet ﷺ this? Because he didn't take part in the battle. He's just standing guard and a stray arrow comes to him. And then she says, but if not, meaning if he's not in Jannah, then Allah will see what I'll do, meaning how I'm going to wail and cry. So then the Prophet ﷺ tells her, woe unto you, are you bereft of your son? Those are wonderful gardens, and your son has attained the highest garden in paradise. This is just one of the guards, the highest garden in paradise. Not to mention those who dive into the thick of battle. And in this battle, we saw relatives against relatives, tribesmen against tribesmen, father against son. An example of father against son is Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu. When his son, Abdullah, during the Battle of Badr, was not a Muslim. He became Muslim after Badr. And when he became Muslim, he told his father, he said, "O father, I would see you during the Battle of Badr and avoid meeting with you and hide from you." And then his father said to him, "By Allah, if I had seen you, I would have killed you." No allegiance to anyone but Allah and His Messenger. And on that day, there was no father, there was no son, it was just believer and unbeliever. Then we have the example of Umar ibn al-Khattab, who made sure that he killed Al-As ibn Hisham ibn al-Mughira, who was his uncle. He made sure he killed his uncle. They asked him why. He said, so that Allah knows that there is no love in my heart except to the people of obedience, meaning obedience to Allah, and the people of Iman. This is the example given by Umar. Likewise, there was a man by the name of Abu al-Bukhtari, and the Prophet ﷺ had, if you remember, given specific orders that he should not be killed, because he was from Banu Hashim and they were compelled, they were forced to come to the battle. But the story of Abu al-Bukhtari, he was killed eventually, and the Prophet ﷺ had given instructions not that he shouldn't be killed. So one of the Sahaba came, and when he saw him, he didn't come from the side where he was. He went around to the other side to attack someone near him. So Abu al-Bukhtari asked him, what made you do that? And he told him the Prophet ﷺ gave us instructions not to kill you. So then Abu al-Bukhtari took advantage of this, and he kept running after this Sahabi, swinging at him, trying to kill him. So he had no choice but to defend himself and to kill him. And then when he said that to the Prophet ﷺ, the Prophet ﷺ forgave him, because he's defending himself and he couldn't just let him kill him because he was not supposed to be killed. Then likewise, we said one of the mushrikeen, Utbah ibn Rabi'ah, who went out in the first duels, and he was killed at the beginning of the battle. But his son, Abu Hudhayfa ibn Utbah ibn Rabi'ah, he was there in the battle, and he witnessed this. And then at the end, there are narrations that when he saw his father in the pit, that's where they threw all the dead of the mushrikeen, the Prophet ﷺ saw a different look in his face, but he asked him, and he did not deny that his father got what he deserved. There was also another incident. One of the muhajirin, the immigrants, Mus'ab ibn Umair, and he saw his brother. One of the Ansar had captured his brother, who was one of the mushrikeen. And when he saw him, he told him to tighten that knot on his brother, tighten the knot, because the prisoner's mother is wealthy, and she'll give him a handsome ransom. So she'll make sure that he ties him well and he doesn't escape from him. So then his brother, his name is Abu Aziz, he started to plead with him that, through family ties and we're brothers. And then Mus'ab ibn Umair told him clearly that the Ansari has more right of brotherhood than you do. That shows also the unity that the Muslims had individually within their army, as opposed to that of the kuffar. So then all the bodies of the kuffar were thrown into a pit. And then it's narrated that the Prophet ﷺ at night went to the pit and he spoke to them. He said, O people of the pit, O Utbah ibn Rabi'ah, O Shaybah ibn Rabi'ah, the brother, O Umayyah ibn Khalaf, O Abu Jahl ibn Hisham, have you found what your Lord promised you to be true? Surely I have found what my Lord promised me to be true. And then the Prophet ﷺ was asked that he's speaking to bodies that are rotting, and the Prophet ﷺ responded that you do not hear me any more than they can hear me. And the Sahaba radiallahu anhum, they themselves had a disagreement in the understanding of this. Aisha radiallahu anha said that she did not understand it in this sense, while others have explained it that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made the dead hear the sayings of His Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So when the Muslims were victorious at Badr, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam sent Abdullah ibn Rawaha and Zayd ibn Haritha to Medina to give them the good news, because it will take them a time. And it's also narrated that the Prophet ﷺ never left the battlefield unless after he stayed there 3 days, with burials and everything, and then they headed back. So he sent Abdullah ibn Rawaha and Zayd ibn Haritha to give the good news to the people in Medina, also so that they don't stay in a state of panic and worry and wondering who won and who lost. So when they arrived in Medina in advance to give the good news of the victory, and the Muslims all made takbir, and some even went out to the road leading to Badr and stayed to wait for the Prophet ﷺ to arrive and for the Muslims. And Usama ibn Zayd comments, Usama ibn Zayd ibn Haritha, who came to give the news, has a comment about this, saying that the news came to us, meaning the news of the victory of Badr, just as we finished leveling the earth over Ruqayyah, the daughter of the Prophet ﷺ. And the reaction of the loss of the Quraysh in Mecca was that, for one, it taught them a very valuable lesson. And they were also incredibly shocked that this army was defeated by such a small army of poorly equipped men. And there were tears in every household, because every household had someone that was either dead or someone that was captured. And they were very humiliated, and that made them thirsting for revenge. So much so that crying and wailing were forbidden in Mecca. No one was allowed to cry or wail and so on, because they said this will cause the Muslims to rejoice. And the effects of this anger and wanting to get even can be seen later on in the Battle of Uhud. And this made it more difficult for the Meccans, because typically when you cry, it eases the pain and it helps ease the suffering. So they were prohibited and forbidden from crying and wailing and so on. And on top of that, to add to their humiliation, the news of the Muslim victory at Badr spread to all parts of Arabia. And it also reached Al-Najashi in Abyssinia, in Al-Habasha. And when the news reached him, radiallahu anhu, he gathered the Muslims that were there, that people who had migrated from Mecca, they were still there, still in Abyssinia. He gathered them and he told them the good news. So, to look at some of the reasons why a small group defeated such a large group, we mentioned a lot of things. Amongst them was that the Muslims had good leadership, and their leadership was also unified, and the kuffar had two leaders who were, sometimes one of them wanted to go back and one of them persisted and wanted to continue with the war. And likewise, because of the new strategy that the Prophet ﷺ had introduced into the warfare, and because the Muslims were fighting for their belief, they were fighting for something they truly believed in, and they were ready to die for that. And the Meccans were fighting for their wealth. Some were fighting for their wealth, some just wanted to get even, some wanted to make sure they exterminate their religion. So there are different beliefs, different factors that motivated them. And then we said that the Muslims had very high morale, and part of that is due to things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made possible to increase the morale of the Muslims, and part of that is what the Prophet ﷺ reminding the companions, promising them paradise. And examples of high morale during the battle, where if you remember the story of the two youth, Waaz and Muawwidh, who wanted to kill Abu Jahl, and one of them in some narrations around 14 and the other a little younger than him. So this is just an example. The two of the youngest people, and they shoot high. They want to go after the head of the army of the kuffar. Likewise, another proof of the high morale that they had, and this part also had some help from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, where it's narrated that Ibn Mas'ud radiallahu anhu, while they were standing in line for battle and the army was within seeing distance, and he asked the man next to him, he said, how many are they? To estimate their numbers. And the man, even though there were 1,000, estimated that there were about 70 or more, or about 100. So this is from the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that when the Muslims looked at the kuffar, they looked few, even though there were 3 times more. And when the mushrikeen looked at the Muslims, they saw them much more than their army. And this is by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to raise the morale of the Muslims. Likewise, there is a story when the army returned back to Medina. Abu Salama, remember him, the husband of Salama radiallahu anha, the Muslims came out rejoicing, happy, cheering. And he was telling them, why are you cheering? It was nothing except that we went and saw a few old men who were bald, and we slaughtered them like camels and came back. This shows you how high the morale was. And likewise, the Prophet ﷺ himself was raising morale. You remember the story of Umayr ibn al-Humam, the lad of 16 years, when the Prophet ﷺ was telling them about the paradise whose width is that of the heavens and the earth. He threw his dates. This was the kind of morale that existed amongst the soldiers of the army of the Muslimin. And a surprising thing about Badr, and we said that battles in these times used to take a long time. They would take a whole day and sometimes continue into the darkness of the night, as the armies between the battles between the Muslims and the Persians and other battles. But the Battle of Badr, we said that it's only around 2 hours. The entire battle, around 2 hours. And this added to the bewilderment of the Quraysh, that they were defeated so quickly. They were expecting battles that would take a long time, and they had their camels and their food and their dancers, and it's supposed to be a picnic and a quick victory. And it took only 2 hours, the Muslims defeated them so quickly. So these were some of the things that were physical and also had something to do with human reasons for the victory. And we want to look at some of the divine reasons for the victory. First of all, it was in Ramadan. which is the month of victory. Now it's become, the month of soup and meat and sleeping. But it's actually the month of victory, and we look throughout the history, from Badr on, because this was the first year, in the second year after the Hijrah, the year of Badr. This was the first year that fasting was prescribed for the Muslims. And the Battle of Badr was on the 17th of Ramadan. And we see from after this battle until today, even in our times, you hear the Mujahideen, they say that they're most victorious in Ramadan because of the dua and other things. But it's the month of victory. Likewise, it was the first time that angels ever descended into battle. First time ever that angels descend into battle. And we want to look at this because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent down 5,000 angels to assist the Muslims. Now, and they were headed by Jibreel alayhi salam. Even though only one is enough, just one angel is more than enough. But then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent 5,000. And why so many? And some scholars explain that it was to give like tathbeet, or to make the hearts firm for the believers. And they know they have so many angels backing them up. If you're told by Allah that there are 5,000 angels behind you, you will jump into anything. You will not have any fear. So this really made the hearts of the believers stand firm. And likewise, some scholars say it's also to show the position of the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will send down 5,000 angels to support him and his companions in this battle, even though one is enough. Even though Jibreel alayhi salam alone is enough. Because we know from the hadith where Jibreel alayhi salam has 600 wings. 2 of them can cover the horizon. And that Jibreel alayhi salam with the tip of one wing, just the tip of one wing, lifted the people of Lut alayhi salam all the way to the first heaven, until the angels in the first heaven could hear the barking of their dogs and the crowing of their roosters, and then brought them down. It was just the tip of a wing. So then 5,000 angels, as we said, so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala have made firm the hearts of the believers. Because if we look at the number of dead from the mushrikeen, it was only 70. And 70 people dead, and if you had 5,000 angels, you would expect not a single one of them would leave the battlefield. But like again, as we said, it's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala brought it down to show the position of His Prophet ﷺ and to make firm the hearts of the believers. And in some narrations that the angels had swords of fire. One of the companions of the Prophet ﷺ describing that the Prophet ﷺ said the angels had swords of fire, and that whoever was struck by an angel, you would see that they would leave a mark of burnings on their face or around their fingertips and so on. So that companion says that they went and looked amongst the dead, and they found several of them that were, you could identify them as being struck by angels. So he said several of them. So not even all the 70 were killed by angels. And for that reason, the Battle of Badr had a lot to do with the actions of the human beings. And there are examples also of Al-Abbas, the uncle of the Prophet ﷺ, who was a large man. And he was captured by Abdullah ibn Mas'ud. In some narrations, Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, who was a very small man. So, and in some narrations that a man brought him, and he said that he captured him. And then he says, Al-Abbas comments, by Allah, this is not the man who captured me. I was captured by a man who was bald, and had a very handsome face, and he had a piebald horse. A piebald meaning a mottled, blotched black and white, or black and brown, and so on. And then he says, Al-Abbas comments, radiallahu anhu, that I don't see him here. And then the Prophet ﷺ said that the man has been assisted by a malak, an angel. And there was also the narration of a man that was chasing one of the kuffar, and then he heard a voice from above him, and then he looked and the man had been struck in the face. This also was the assistance of one of the angels. And likewise there were miracles during the battle, and we discussed the sword of Ukasha ibn Mihsan, that his sword broke during the battle, and the Prophet ﷺ gave him a long piece of wood, and he shook it, and it became a long, strong, white sword. And Ukasha radiallahu anhu used it for all the battles in the rest of his life until he was killed. So this is one of the miracles likewise. And also there was when the Prophet ﷺ threw the dust into the eyes of the kuffar. And some of the kuffar, later on they became Muslims. And when they became Muslims, they narrated that when the Prophet ﷺ threw just this handful of dust, They said that everyone in the army got some of it in their face and in their eyes. Every single one of the army of the Quraysh. And there's also the narration of the companion of the Prophet ﷺ, Qatada, where he was struck, an arrow struck him in the eye, and his eye came out. But it was hanging out like this. So then he retreated from battle. And some of the Ansar told him, let's cut it off. So he went to the Prophet ﷺ. So Prophet ﷺ made him sit down, and he took his eye and he put it back into the socket. And it is said that that eye never gave him problems again. And he commented that he couldn't remember which eye popped out. There was not a scar, there was nothing. And this is also one of the miracles that occurred during the Battle of Badr. And we mentioned, again from the divine assistance, we mentioned the rain and the sleep. And we mentioned the sleep that overcame the army of the Muslims. And it was for them a kind of rest, it was refreshing and a rest from the long march. And we said that Anas ibn Malik ibn Abu Talha was mentioning, he was actually one of the guards of the Prophet ﷺ. And that's why he was mentioning that when he tried to stay awake and then his sword would drop from his hand and he would pick it up and then it would drop again for 7 times. And this is the sleep that overcame them. And likewise we mentioned the rain. And Allah mentions that the rain to purify them from the stains of the shaitan. And it had another physical advantage, and that is where the Muslims were camped. It solidified the ground and it made it easier to run on and for the horses to gallop on. While we said just less than a mile away, for the kuffar it made everything muddy and slippery and so on. So, and we all know that in the end everything, victory and everything in the end ultimately is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But it is also not fair to say that, and some people say this, that the Battle of Badr had absolutely nothing to do with human beings. Everything was from the sky. But we see the efforts of the Sahaba of the Prophet ﷺ. Then came the issue, comes the issue of the spoils of war, al-anfal. And Ubad ibn Samit radiallahu anhu narrates, he said that we went out with the Prophet ﷺ and I witnessed Badr with him. The armies clashed and Allah defeated the enemy. A group of men went after them, pursuing and killing them, while another group pounced upon the spoils of war, claiming it and gathering it up. So one group is running after the retreating Quraysh army, and the other group is busy collecting the spoils of war. Another group remained with the Messenger of Allah ﷺ, protecting him, so that the enemy might not attack while they were unaware. So the third group stayed with the Prophet ﷺ, making sure they protect him. When night fell and all the men gathered together, those who had collected the spoils of war said, "We collected it, and there is no share in it for anyone else." Those who pursued the enemy said, "You do not have a stronger claim to it than we do. We kept the enemy away from it and defeated them." And those who guarded the Prophet ﷺ said, "We were afraid that the enemy may attack him while we were unaware, so we were busy protecting him." And upon that, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed in the beginning of Surah Al-Anfal,
يسألونك عن الأنفال قل الأنفال لله والرسول فاتقوا الله وأصلحوا ذات بينكم وأطيعوا الله ورسوله إن كنتم مؤمنين.
So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reveals that they ask you about the spoils of war. Say the spoils of war are for Allah and His Messenger. So وَأَصْلِحُوا ذَاتَ بَيْنِكُمْ, make amends between each other, to that meaning. Na'am, reconcile, make amends between each other. So then on the way to Medina they reach a large sand hill, and the Prophet ﷺ divided the spoils of war equally among the fighters after giving a fifth to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His Messenger. What that means is it's not for the Prophet ﷺ, this is actually, and this would be known later on as what would go into Bayt al-Mal, and this is the money of the government. So the GNP, the gross national product of the Muslims, is from the spoils of war. And similar to the spoils of war was the ransom money that they got from the captives. And the prisoners of war, they caused a problem, because this was the first time in Islamic history that captives were brought in after a war. So the Prophet ﷺ sought the advice of his companions, and he asked Abu Bakr, and Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, and the narration reflects their personalities. where Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu said that these are our relatives and that this money can be used to strengthen Islam, and that's what we should do. And we should ransom them, and whoever can pay, and then we'll use the money to strengthen Islam. Then Umar radiallahu anhu disagreed. He said, by Allah, I disagree. I think that you should give, he's telling the Prophet ﷺ, give me so-and-so, one of his relatives, and that I will slaughter him. And should give Ali so-and-so, one of his relatives, and that he will slaughter him. And he kept saying that everyone will hold one of his relatives and kill them. We don't want any captives. So the Prophet ﷺ was more comfortable with the opinion of Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, and Umar narrates that the following day he entered upon the Prophet ﷺ, and him and Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu were weeping. So then Umar, and this kind of also shows, because people always think that Umar just the whole time had his sword out, but he also had a very gentle side. Inshallah we'll see if we discuss Umar. And he said to them a very nice word. He said to them that he wanted to know what is making them weep, so that if it's something that is worth, or something that would make him, that he would cry with them. And that if it's something that wouldn't make him cry, that he would just cry with them because they're crying. It shows how close he was to his friends. Women are very good at this. If their friend is crying, they can cry quickly. But for men, this is difficult. And yet, this man who is so rough and so harsh, he's offering this. So then, the Prophet ﷺ tells him that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has revealed,
ما كان لنبي أن يكون له أسرى حتى يثخن في الأرض تريدون عرض الدنيا والله يريد الآخرة والله عزيز حكيم.
Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that it is not for a prophet that he should have prisoners of war, meaning so that he could free them for a ransom, until he has made a great slaughter in the land of his enemies. You desire the good of this world, meaning the ransom money, but Allah desires the hereafter for you. Allah is almighty and wise. Were it not a preordainment from Allah, a severe torment would have touched you for what you took. So this is why they were crying, that a severe torment would have touched you. And this is Allah speaking to the Muslims. So the opinion of Umar radiallahu anhu was the more correct one, but since they had already done that, then khalas, it became permissible that the prisoners could go and be set free and so on. But the point is that falling into captivity is not, it doesn't mean that all your past sins and crimes against the Muslims and so on were forgiven. And a prisoner of war is different from, for lack of a better term, just say a war criminal. And some of the leaders of the kuffar that were captured, some of them were war criminals. And POWs, prisoners of war, are also different from detainees, right? In any case, those Meccans, they had a past of offending Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and offending His Messenger sallallahu alayhi wasallam, and they incited people to war. So is it right that they just be left alone without the Muslims after giving them an opportunity to exterminate them, that they just let them go again? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was teaching the believers that it's not right to just look towards the gains, the money and the ransom, and forget what they've done in the past. So the ransom was placed between 1,000 to 4,000 dirhams, according to the financial situation of the person that was captured. And those that had no money at all, but they had the ability to read and write, would teach 10 of the children, because the people of Mecca were, generally they were literate, and the people of Medina, a lot of them were illiterate. So those who didn't have money, if they could teach 10 children to read and write, that they would set them free. And some also didn't have any money and were very poor, and the Prophet ﷺ just set them free. And others on the condition that they would never fight the Muslims again. And one of them, the Prophet ﷺ let him go on the condition he would never fight the Muslims again, and they caught him again after another battle, and he had fighting. And this one, and this, the Prophet ﷺ said the famous saying that the Muslim does not fall into the same mistake twice. You see. And amongst those that was captured was a man by the name of Abu al-As, who was the husband of Zainab, the daughter of the Prophet ﷺ. And to set him free, she gave a necklace that belonged to Khadija radiallahu anha. And in some narrations, the Prophet ﷺ, when he saw that necklace, that he began to cry sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And And he also asked them if they would like to let him go so he can return to his wife. And in some narrations the stipulation was that he would allow her to migrate. But in any case, this was before it was made haram or prohibited for the Muslim women to marry non-Muslim men, so that no one takes this as a, well, they don't need this as a proof. Some people are making that halal these days anyways. But there were only 2 captives killed. If we exclude Umayy ibn Khalaf, as we remember, we said Umayy ibn Khalaf, that Abdurrahman ibn Auf was his friend, and he was collecting some shields that he found, and then he saw Umayy ibn Khalaf, who, him and his son Umayyah, they were walking, just surrendering, or basically they were captured. They were just not struggling or resisting. So Umayyah called Abdurrahman ibn Auf, told him, I have something better for you than these shields, take me as your captive. So he dropped his shields. He was gathering them and they were worth something. He dropped them and he starts walking with Umayyah. And he's just walking with him. He doesn't have to hold him. Khalas, the man knows there's no escape. So then Bilal saw him and he said his statement that لا نجوت إن نجا, that if he's safe today, may I not be safe. So then Abdurrahman ibn Auf told him, he's my captive. And he told him, so he went to the Ansar and he told him, do you want to kill the man who used to torture me? The torture of Bilal was very popular. So he said, do you want to kill the man who used to torture me? And a group came with him. So they came to Umayyah and he had been captured. And Abdurrahman ibn Auf tried to calm down the situation, told him that he's my captive and so on, and they just drew their swords. And he told Umayyah, he told him to go down on the ground, and he covered him with his body. It's narrated that they just kept poking him with their swords and they killed him. They even wounded Abdurrahman ibn Auf radiallahu anhu in the process, that he got a cut or something. So Umayy ibn Khalaf was killed. But besides him, 2 that were captured and were killed where the Prophet ﷺ distributed the spoils of war. A man by the name of Al-Nadr ibn al-Harith, and he was the man that used to say Asatir al-Awwaleen. 7 times in the Quran Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that they refer to the Quran as Asatir al-Awwaleen. Every time Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed that, it was in response to this man. He used to tell stories, Jahiliyyah and so on, and he used to say that the stories of Muhammad are not better than my stories. He brought them down to a level of just stories. And so when he was captured, the Prophet ﷺ ordered Ali ibn Abi Talib to strike his head. And likewise another man by the name of Uqba ibn Abi Mu'ayt, and he was popular, one of the leaders of the Kuffar, and he was the man, la'anahullah, who came and put the entrails, the intestines of the camel and some sheep on the back of the Prophet ﷺ while he was prostrating. And he was, in another narration, the man also who, also, likewise, he was the one who strangled the Prophet ﷺ with his cloak one time, choking him, until Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu came and let him go. And in another narration, besides the entrails of the camel or the sheep, he was the one, the Prophet ﷺ was prostrating, and he came and he put his foot on the neck of the Prophet ﷺ, and the Prophet ﷺ comments on this, saying that he almost saw death. So this man was ordered. These people were criminals. They offend Allah and His Messenger ﷺ in the worst way, and Ali ibn Abi Talib struck his neck also. There was also amongst the captives a man by the name of Suhail ibn Amr, and he was known as a powerful orator. He would speak well and so on, and he used to speak strongly against the Muslims when he was a non-Muslim. And Umar ibn Khattab wanted to teach him a lesson, so he asked the Prophet ﷺ, let me break his front teeth, so that he won't be able to speak against Islam again, or you. Once you break your front teeth, and then the sa becomes a tha and everything is messed up, you're not a powerful orator anymore. So what happened? Then we see the wisdom of the Prophet ﷺ. He never gets even in that sense. The Prophet ﷺ told him that leave him, perhaps one day he will stand in a position that you will appreciate from him. And it came true when the Prophet ﷺ died, and the Arabian Peninsula, a lot of it, as you know, apostated, except for Mecca, Medina, right? And Mecca and the Taif. Mecca, remember in Medina, even people like Umar radiallahu anhu, they were maybe not making too much sense after the death of the Prophet ﷺ, but Abu Bakr stood and he spoke and he made a lot of sense, and he, firmed the hearts of the believers. In Mecca, at the same time, it was narrated that Suhail ibn Amr made almost the same speech, and by the grace of Allah, and then through Suhail ibn Amr, the people of Mecca remained upon Islam. And that was because of the wisdom of the Prophet ﷺ that they did not break his front teeth. So, in the story of Badr, there are a lot of lessons, and there are a lot of permissibilities that came about as a result of this battle, such as the ransoming of the captives, that you could take a ransom for the captives, and that you can send spies. At times of warfare, this is permissible. And then that the shura, the Prophet ﷺ consulted his companions about going into the battlefield, about a lot of things. So this is also one of the lessons that we learn from the Battle of Badr, and that the spoils of war and how they're split and how that they're permitted. And the excellence, we learn the excellence of the companions of the Prophet ﷺ that took part in the Battle of Badr. And that the martyrs, they're buried in their place more or less, and that there is no prayer prayed over them. It is not narrated that the Prophet ﷺ prayed over any of the martyrs. And besides the heroics that we saw during the Battle of Badr, we also learn that numbers are not the only thing with which a person wins a war or a battle, and it is also the iman. And with that, we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to strengthen our iman and to help us put our trust in Him more. وجزاكم الله خير وصلى اللهم وبارك على محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
For more tapes produced by the Center for Islamic Information and Education, visit us at www.ciie.org.